Good evening. Welcome to Grand Rapids Community College. It's a real pleasure to see so many of you here tonight for this important panel discussion on energy economics. Energy economics is something that we take very seriously here at GRCC, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about three ways in which we're approaching that here at the college. The first is that less than 2 years ago, we started a partnership with Energy Education for an energy management program. And in less than 2 years, we have saved over $1.8 million for our energy budget. And I'd like to congratulate Dorothy Sidoni, Tom Smith of Facilities, and their entire team in Energy Education. This has been a fantastic partnership. Sure. The other way in which we're approaching sustainability and energy economics is that this last year, through our rewards and recognition program, we decided to approach sustainability and energy around creating an innovation challenge. And so college-wide, earlier this year, we set up teams around the goal that we want to reduce our energy costs so that we could redirect those dollars that we save for student programs. And so each team needs to be made of at least one student, one faculty member, and one staff member. And we just completed actually the submission for round 2 of that process. So this spring we're going to be announcing the winners for that. And we look forward to rolling out the ideas that come from that. So we're very proud of that. And the third way, you can't talk about economics and energy without talking about jobs and really green skills, because green skills can be found in no matter what occupation or what position. So, and our Julie Parks of our esteemed panel will be certainly here to talk about that in great depth. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rachel Hood. Rachel was honored by the Grand Rapids Business Journal as one of the top 40 young professionals under 40, and Rachel Hood has been the director of West Michigan Environmental Action Council since 2007. Please welcome Rachel Hood.
Thank you, Moss, and thanks to GRCC for hosting us tonight. We're so glad to see so many of you here. The West Michigan Environmental Action Council has been West Michigan's preeminent resource for environmental education and advocacy since 1968. Founded by a diverse group of citizens and organizational stakeholders, our history is linked to some of the most important victories of our early state and national environmental movements, including the banning of the pesticide DDT, writing the Michigan Environmental Protection Act, which allows citizens to protect our state's natural resources. At our last forum, we were happy to announce that MEPA, the Environmental Protection Act, had been fully restored by the Michigan Supreme Court. And since then, our new leaders in Lansing have seen fit to provide a fresh challenge to the act and to the rights of our citizens to protect our state's natural resources. We hope that, in fact, we know that you care deeply about protecting our water and building more sustainable communities. In your program today, you'll find a postcard highlighting opportunities to become involved in WMEAC's advocacy program. If you have an interest in becoming more involved in promoting positive environmental outcomes, and I hope you do, please take a moment this evening to sign out the form. And feel free to signal one of our staff or interns on the side of the room if you need a pen in order to do that. Together, we can take action to restore our natural resources and protect them for future generations, and to advocate about issues like MEPA, clean energy, and more. It's important to communicate to our leaders that these are not just environmental issues. There's a significant economic story in the story of our energy future as well. This is particularly true when we talk about our next steps, as we will today. And more so than I think the opposition realizes, alternative energy and energy efficiency is all about creating wealth for our region and our nation. It's possible for you to come to many of the same conclusions about this issue without even considering the environmental concerns in the discussion. Tonight we're talking about jobs and we're talking about prosperity. We are talking about how fiscally irresponsible it would be if we maintained the status quo. First, we'd like to thank our host, Grand Rapids Community College, and our sponsors, MI Biz, PM Environmental, A5 Communications, and Sierra Club of West Michigan. We'd also like to thank Dwelltech Solutions, a new partner in our work towards energy efficiency. They have a great display in the atrium. If you have any questions for the panelists, we ask you to write them on the index card that's inside of your packets. You can send them out to the edges of the room, and we will take as many of them as we can tonight. In past events, we've been unable to answer all of the great questions that people have at the event itself. So we've been taking those questions and providing answers to them on our blog, the WMEACblog.org. It's pretty easy to remember, the WMEACblog.org. We'll address your questions over the next few days. Our moderator this evening is Brian Schultz. He is the Construction Trades Manager for Grand Rapids Community College. Brian serves as the Program Development Specialist for Renewable Energy at GRCC. He is a vocational expert, and so he knows more than most about what it means to look for a job, with nearly 30 years of experience in educating students for skilled trades. Brian is currently serving as a subject matter expert, let me see if I can do this, for the National Center for Construction Education and Research. It's a mouthful. And they are developing a wind turbine technician training program. We're lucky to have someone who is right in the thick of this discussion to help us through it today. So, Brian, I'll let you take the microphone.
Well, thanks to Rachel and WMEAC for putting this on. I attended the first two sessions, and I'm certainly hoping that this one is as good as the first two. Hopefully, it will be better. I also like to thank GRCC for hosting this. And I also like to thank, I see out in the audience here, we have a couple of our classes here, our wind energy technology class, or some of the students from that class, and also some of the students from our sustainability, Introduction to Sustainability course are here. And we need to be spreading the word to young folks like this, and I'm glad to see that they came to attend this. I'd like to thank our panelists for showing up here also tonight. If anybody has cell phones, this is a good time to check them and make sure that they're not going to ring
that's a good idea.
or otherwise disturb us.
Yeah, let's do that.
So it's my pleasure to introduce this fine selection of panelists. I know most of these folks, only a couple that I don't work with on a regular basis. And we'll start here on my right with Rick Chapla, who is the Vice President of Business Development for the Right Place Incorporated. Rick has been involved with community development and land use planning for 30 years. He has assisted local units of government and private development interests with the use of economic development policies. He coordinates efforts to grow renewable energy and food processing manufacturing supply chains. And I know Rick primarily from his sponsorship of the wind working group, the solar working group, and the biomass working group that is hosted at Varnum once a month. Seated next to Rick is John Sarver, chairman of the Michigan Wind Working Group. John started with the Michigan Energy Office in 1976 and is recently retired, although I see more of him now than when he worked.
I don't have to work anymore. I have more time, right?
He was responsible for residential energy programs and efforts to promote solar and wind energy. John chairs the Michigan Wind Working Group and serves on the Great Lakes Wind Collaborative Steering Committee. Next to John is Haris Alabash. Good. No?
It's close.
Hars. Director, Office of Energy and Sustainability for the City of Grand Rapids. He directs the City of Grand Rapids Office of Energy and Sustainability, State and Federal Legislative Affairs, and Neighborhood Enterprise Zones. He represents Grand Rapids in a multitude of capacities. Next to Hars is Deborah Steckety, Executive Director at Aquinas College. And Deborah Steckety serves as Associate Professor of Sustainable Business and Executive Director of the Center for Sustainability at Aquinas College. Her current research focuses on the social dimensions of sustainability, with a particular interest in innovation networks and adaptive management. She earned her PhD in public policy and political science at Indiana University. And we've had quite a few students from programs here at GRCC that have made the transition to Deborah's program in sustainable business. Next in line here is a substitute tonight. It's really not who it says on your program. This is Paul Proudfoot, who is sitting in for Monica Martinez. And Paul is Director of Electric Operations, Michigan Public Service Commission. At the Michigan Public Service Commission, Paul Proudfoot has worked to oversee the implementation of Public Acts 286 and 295. Those are our major state energy laws that were passed in 2008, better known as the Renewable Energy Portfolio. His work promotes and regulates the development of clean, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and optimization statewide. Sitting next to Paul is Arn Bozart. Arn is the director of the Michigan Alternative Renewable Energy Center in Muskegon. Arn has served as director of MERIC, as it's called, since November of 2009. The center serves as a business incubator and promotes alternative and renewable energy technologies and provides leadership in technology innovation and commercialization. And last but not least,
he works for me, that's why he has to say that.
is Julie Parks, Director of Workforce Development at Grand Rapids Community College. Julie has over 14 years experience in workforce development and curriculum development and recently received the Grand Rapids Community College Employee Excellence Award. She's also known affectionately as the Goddess of Workforce Development.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
So we have a lot of talent here. A lot of people who have spent many years in the alternative renewable energy efficiency world. And if you have questions, like Rachel said, you can write them on cards and pass them out to the end aisle and they'll be brought up. And if at the end we have enough time, we'll go through those questions and answer as many as we possibly can. Now is the time to pick their collective brains and get the answers. So we have a few prepackaged questions to get this program started with. Some came from our panelists, some came from other individuals, some were actually emailed to me. So we're going to start off with, I think, a fairly easy one that shouldn't take too much to get an answer to. We'll start off with Arn Bozart. The question is, what are the projections for future energy use in the U.S.? How do those projections relate to the economic outlook, and what do they mean for renewable energy?
Well, if that's an easy question, I'm anxious to hear what the hard ones are going to be.
Well, I've heard you answer this one so many times, I thought you...
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to get us started. There is no easy, simple answer to the question, Brian, and as all of us know. But here's one thing that is very clear, and I often say this at these kinds of forums. When it comes to energy, status quo is not an option. If you walk away with nothing else this evening, you have to accept the premise that status quo is not an option. In other words, the way all of us have come to know energy during our lifetimes of 70 years or less, depending on your age in this room, the way we've done energy will change. I think in the future we're going to see a much broader, more expansive energy portfolio. We are going to bring solar energy into the mix. We're going to bring wind energy into the mix. We're going to bring new hybrid versions of fossil fuel energy into the mix, and it's all going to change. I would also project that we're going to do energy on a more localized basis, a large national grid with limited distribution points, with energy coming from large traditional energy plants such as coal plants, which we know here in this area. That's going to change. In the next 10, 20, 30 years, I think we'll see significantly different methods of providing energy. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, let me ask you, Aaron, how would you weigh the comparative cost between traditional and renewable energy in the future?
I think in the future, the cost of energy is really going to equalize. Right now, we're sort of living with sort of a false premise that energy, as we presently produce it and use it, is cheap. And here in Michigan, we predominantly use coal energy. I have nothing against coal. I think coal will remain in the mix, but we have to recognize that the fleet of coal plants in the state of Michigan in particular are very old. I happen to work across the bay in Muskegon from the oldest coal plant in the Consumers Energy fleet, which is about 60 years old. That plant has long been paid for, and so its production is very, very inexpensive, relatively speaking. But if we were to have to bring a brand new coal plant online today or next year or 3 years from now, we would see some strikingly different numbers. And there are some economic assessments that have been done recently at Grand Valley State University, for example, that you'll see in the very near future that will show you that the playing field is going to level dramatically when it comes to traditional fossil fuels, wind, solar, and other energy sources.
Yeah, I've heard that Michigan actually has the oldest fleet of coal plants in the nation. Anybody else want to take a crack at that particular shot, comparing what energy is going to look like in the future and what the relative costs might be?
I'll take. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I agree with Arna that the cost of renewable energy is going to come down significantly in the future. I think the key issue is here really how do you work with our policymakers, with legislators, to try to influence them to make decisions that take into consideration the economics of energy. And we heard Rachel, we heard Brian talk about job creation, as well as Brian, as well as Moss Ingram from GRCC. The importance of energy in the whole economic development picture is extremely valued. The city of Grand Rapids, for example, in its sustainability plan focuses heavily not only on energy management, which is an important start, energy education, and then energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. But the cost of energy, and I'm glad that we have the Michigan Public Service Commission here with us tonight, is the cost of renewable energy is going to come down once when we start really taking seriously the renewable energy, started attracting large wind developments into the state, and start attracting people who are going to support solar panel projects. We all know that the feed-in tariff, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the feed-in tariff, how well it worked. Those were oversubscribed by, as far as I understand, 300%. And that kind of incentive really signals for companies like Unisolar and local companies that produce solar panels that this is maybe a state where you can produce solar panels and you can put them on roofs, even though people claim that there is not enough sun. I think there's more sun than there is in Germany. And Germany has shown a tremendous success in installing these solar panels on their roofs and utilizing incentives and creating positive policy environment for solar and wind projects as well. So I think I agree with Arn's assessment that the renewable energy cost is going to come down significantly, as evidenced by the most recent Consumers Energy projections for their cost of renewable energy.
Okay, picking up on that, Paul, I'm going to give you a shot here in just a second. I want to read this first. On February 14th, 2011, just recently, the Michigan Public Service Commission published its report on the 2008 State Energy Act to the Michigan legislature. The report indicated that the levelized cost of new coal in Michigan is $133 per megawatt hour. Renewables cost $99 per megawatt hour, and energy optimization is $13 per megawatt hour. What exactly does this mean, and how should it be used to inform energy planning in Michigan?
Well, first of all, I just let everybody know, make sure everybody understands what the levelized cost means.
Okay.
It's a technique used in the utility planning industry to compare dissimilar resources. So, for example, you take a coal plant, you would take all of the costs associated with that coal plant over its lifetime, return of and return on the investment and all the O&M and fuel that went into it, and you present value that back into the current period, and then you basically divide it by the output over the lifetime. So you get a number you can compare among things. So now that you understand that, the key thing that you're looking at here is what is the cheapest energy. The cheapest energy that I've always discovered is the energy you don't use. And this is just a good example of that. Now, the $133 coal plant does include a carbon tax. So we're comparing that to, it's a real cost to compare to a renewable resource. And I think the other thing we're seeing is an example in the real world of renewables getting cheaper. I know when we were doing the estimates for PA 295, we were looking at $120 wind, $120 per megawatt hour wind energy on a levelized basis. You know, the first contract we signed, or the commission approved for Detroit Edison, was $115, and now we're seeing contracts in the $98 range. And it's not only driven by the fact that the equipment is cheaper, we're seeing a jump in capacity factor, which is critical with large wind turbines, because you get more energy out of that turbine. And we've seen some reports that the capacity factors have jumped from 28% to 38%, which I find almost unbelievable. But what has happened is the manufacturers have started designing a turbine and a blade design for the Michigan wind regime.
Can you give me an idea how much the carbon tax is adding to the cost for a coal plant?
It was about a $30 to $40.
Yeah, I thought it was like $31 if I remember right. So if we subtracted that off of the 133, we would still be very competitive with renewables with a new coal plant.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, new coal plants as opposed to existing fully depreciated coal plants are pretty expensive. And new coal plants have to meet best available control technology, which is not always easy to do. Especially we're trying to decide right now. The EPA, I guess, is trying to decide. We're all kind of on the sidelines waiting to see how they do it. What is the best control technology for CO2?
Don't generate it in the first place.
That's the cheapest.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, good. Moving along here, let's move on to another question then, unless anybody else would like to tackle that one in the panel. No? Okay, what are the biggest political and economic hurdles for implementing large-scale renewable energy sources in West Michigan, and how are those hurdles being addressed? And John, I'm going to pick on you first on that one.
Mm-hmm. You said both political and economic.
That's the way it was written.
Yeah, and they are definitely tied together. There's so much that goes on with public policy that affects economics, both with small systems that you may have in your backyard or large systems. And I'll kind of use the extremes. Right now in Michigan, unfortunately, we don't have property tax exemptions for residential solar and wind systems. And so most of them get installed be below the radar screen, which is, I'm assuming, because I just installed a PV system on my roof, 1.3 kilowatt system, and the assessor hasn't come by yet. Thank goodness. Last year, the House did pass a bill to exempt small systems from property taxes. It never got through the Senate, unfortunately. Like I said, most of the systems, I think, are below the radar screen, but it creates a certain amount of uncertainty because we haven't really taken that barrier out. When you think about it, there is no property taxes being generated by these systems, because if they assess them at the value that it costs to install, then you take them down. So there's no tax revenue lost, but state policy could kind of eliminate the uncertainty, which I think obviously boils down to economics ultimately. On a much bigger scale is we need to have a new permitting and leasing framework at the state for offshore wind. The GLOW Council, Great Lakes Wind Council, came up with some recommendations for legislation. Legislation was introduced. It didn't get anywhere. Hopefully it'll be taken up again this year. But when you have, again, that uncertainty, economics don't work for developers. And there are a lot of issues related to the cost of doing something offshore. Those offshore wind farms would be very expensive. I don't know if they really could compete against alternatives. Certainly, I don't know how they would compete maybe with onshore wind farms. But state policy and local policies also, I'm more familiar with state policies, can have a big impact on the economics of both smaller renewable systems and larger systems like large commercial wind farms in the lakes. And obviously I haven't even talked about the most obvious state policy which have already been put in place to have the energy efficiency programs from the utilities and the RPS to really drive the market for renewable energy. And as you see, we put that policy into place, it's driving the market, and the costs are coming in very reasonable.
So let's say next week the township assessor comes by and takes a look at your house, or they do the flyby and they see all your solar panels up there, and they slap an assessment on you that pretty much offsets the value of the electricity you're generating from your solar panels. What's your course of action at that point? Do you have any recourse, or does anyone in the audience have recourse?
Oh, sure. I've appealed my property tax assessments 3 times in the past. I've gone to the state tax tribunal, so there's always an appeal process. But I already have my rationale already figured out, which is it's not unreasonable to tax, and actually this is done for certain types of property, tax something at the revenue that is generated as opposed to the cost of installing something. So basically, if the township ever talks to me, I'll call up the township manager, who I know, of course, and say, hey, Jerry, what would be a reasonable alternative is let's look at the value of the electricity and we'll tax that as opposed to the cost of the installation. And that's done in other areas too. Apparently that's done with rental properties. Now that situation, actually the revenue from rents is greater than the value of the property, at least in East Lansing. So I've kind of thought this through.
Anybody else on the panel like to talk about the political implications here? How we can, okay, go ahead, Horace.
Okay, I can give you a perfect example. Anyone from Grand Haven Township here? All right, no hard feelings here. The city went through the lengthy process working with Grand Haven Township, and I personally went through that process, actually working together with Rockford Berhe, which is, the idea behind the city's renewable energy plan, which is to meet 100% renewable energy by 2020 without giving me any funds to do that. So I have to find the funds and ways to find something that will work. We actually joined with Rockford Berhe, trying to see if we can put 2 large-scale wind turbines at the property that we own. It's adjacent to the Lake Michigan filtration water plant. It's an existing industrial site. And so you talk about the actual impediments to large-scale wind development or any renewable energy projects. You really start with the local opposition and local policies, local zoning rules, ordinances. Again, I have to emphasize the Grand Haven Township their board, their political structure, their staff, they were really excellent people to work with. We were hopefully able to answer questions that Grand Haven Township residents had. But ultimately, the project didn't go through because of the local zoning ordinance. So for us, we really look at every project first and foremost from the economic, and then environmental and social perspective. So if you look at triple bottom line approach, we start with economic. If the economics don't work, I can't take it in good faith to the city commissioner and say, yeah, this works and the payback is 25 years. There's no 25-year payback on wind turbines if their life warranty is like 20 years or something. So when you talk about impediments, we really have to look how the state, with their GLOW Council, with their wind studies, with zoning approvals, what's the current state policy? It's in flux. You know, people are able to use the GLOW Council approach and the suggestion that the wind turbines shouldn't be allowed 1 mile off of the coast, and use that as the law, which is it isn't. It's a recommendation. So we really have to be more informed. We have to create these incentives on the state level, and those incentives don't have to be necessarily economic. They have to be policy incentives. They have to start with basic statements and premises where and how the wind turbines can be built. And if it makes sense for the city or organizations or Grand Haven Township, anyone, Grand Haven, to put wind turbines next to their existing industrial facilities, then the state and the local laws should not be in conflict.
Aaron?
Brian, I would like to add, the public policy issue here perhaps is the driving factor that we all really need to pay attention to. The longer I work in this area of renewable energy and energy technology, it is clear to me, increasingly clear every day actually, that public policy is by far the more complex question than the technology. We're masterful in this country at building things. We have very smart people among us. We have engineers, we have inventors, we have entrepreneurs. We'll figure out the technology. We're figuring it out as we sit here. Where we really get all tied up in knots is on the public policy question. We compete and we basically are conflicted on many levels. We're conflicted at the state level, we're conflicted at the national level, we're conflicted at the local level. We work against each other. Right now, Michigan, as most everyone here knows, has a 10% renewable portfolio standard, which Michigan, by the way, was 28th in the nation to establish an RPS. We didn't exactly jump into this feet first. We're still tiptoeing into that whole area. And so we have states around us with much more robust RPS standards. And so we are not able to compete. And as a result, since the principal theme of our talk here, or discussion, is on the economics of energy, we're not creating a reliable marketplace for alternative renewable energy in the state of Michigan, especially. Manufacturers, entrepreneurs, not sure what they can expect going forward, whether there will be incentives, whether there will be a market for what they produce. Case in point, just today, you'll be reading about it, I think, in some of the media in the next few days. Merrick, the facility where I'm located, has completed an arrangement where we will be selling the solar credits, the SRECs as they're called, for the solar energy that's produced on our building. And I'm working with some gentlemen down in Holland, a couple of young entrepreneurs who are developing a very innovative business where they are available, they're able to market SRECs. We had to go to the state of Ohio to find a marketplace for SRECs. Now, I work for a state institution, a public university, so I went to my administration. I said, now, how are we going to feel about this? You know, Grand Valley State University selling solar RECs to Ohio. Does, you know, this Michigan-Ohio thing is always a little dicey. And the question, to the credit of my administration, the question was, well, can't you sell these in Michigan? And I said, no, there's no marketplace for them. So they said, again, to their credit, go find a marketplace. So we went to the state of Ohio. But here, that's the point. We had to go out of state in Michigan to find a market for renewable energy credit opportunity, and it's so indicative of the public policy issue. We don't have a national standard. If we could ever get Congress to agree on a renewable energy standard for all 50 states, we would instantly create a market for renewable energy product that would stimulate all sorts of development. Entrepreneurs would have new opportunities, businesses would have guaranteed markets for their product and so forth. So the public policy question, national, state, local, that's where the real conundrum lies. It's not about the technology.
Rick, you deal every day with these issues, and I think you're dying to jump in.
Biting my tongue here. Got to talk about economics a little bit, and I'm going to take a little broader swipe at it. I think to begin with, anyway, is that first off, I'll talk about a rule of two, and it applies to every one of us, all of you, all of us. And that's simply as citizens in this country and in this state and in this region, we use too much energy. We have buildings that are energy gluttons. We have transportation systems that are expensive to operate as well as maintain. We spend too much money buying energy sources to come into the state. We spend something north of $25 billion a year to import coal, import natural gas, import oil. We have, I'd love to see some of that $25 billion and going up probably by $1 billion every week, diverted into supporting companies, business development, and alternative forms of energy systems. And we also have too few energy producers. We really, if you look, and again, we can talk about it, but we really don't have much of a, I guess I'd call it an energy production portfolio, no matter what it is. It's a pretty concentrated system of energy production. And that lack of competition, I think, also hinders the economics associated with renewable energy systems.
Deb?
Sure, now that Rick has started to stir it up.
That was the idea, Deb.
That's what I thought. We're running out of time to do it, Rick. And so a couple of points, and I want to speak to the idea of systems, in that I think that one of the problems that we've had in our public policy has been that we have not considered energy to be a systems problem, and that means that we don't look at a systems solution. We don't understand what our energy system needs to do for us, and how we want to look at it moving forward. One of the things, I serve on a number of committees, and one of the discussions, very interesting discussion that we had, is what if our region would become a net energy producer? And that was our public policy goal. What would that mean in terms of the kinds of policies that we'd have in place to reach that goal? How could we align the interests that we have to make that happen? And we haven't had that kind of provocative question asked of our policymakers. So it gets back to, as Paul and I were discussing, the old Jimmy Carter "Put on Your Sweater" speech that some of you may remember. It was probably the first time that a national energy policy was articulated, and we're still absent that really far-sighted kind of thinking on that. So that's just I think an important point to think about in terms of our policy piece. The other thing that's striking me in what I was hearing is that oftentimes we focus on how much energy do we use. And so we jump up and down with great delight and celebration if we've reduced our energy by 30%. What if we didn't even need, what if we focused on what is the energy that we need? And so now you begin to ask some other kinds of questions. And so we may be using much more than we ever needed. So, I guess it's all in how you ask your questions and what questions you ask. Does that shake it up enough?
But the bottom line for economics is jobs. And so we hear talk of jobs, but why can't we make the link between the energy system and jobs and the renewable portfolio and the standard? Do you know what kind of job creation we would talk about in West Michigan if we could get that standard raised, or across the United States? Do you know how many people we could affect with good jobs that pay living wages? So your jobs discussion, who wants to talk about a job that pays someone $8 an hour? You can't live on $8 an hour. Energy jobs pay more than $8 an hour. Energy-related jobs pay more than $8 an hour. So for all the things that the group talked about, the bottom line is jobs. And so the more we can tie energy and jobs together, I think the better off we'll be economically for people. Because that's really the bottom line, is we could be a huge job creator here. We could have job creation occurring here. And it would be an amazing economic engine for Michigan. That's why when Arn says we were 28th to adopt it, I feel it in my gut every time, because that's 27 states ahead of us that can do a better job in producing jobs and have done a better job in producing jobs.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I was kind of headed in that direction myself. I find it interesting that we are in the political turmoil that we're in over a roughly $2 billion budget deficit, but we have no trouble signing checks for $20+ billion a year to flow out of this state to go somewhere else. And that those dollars could all stay here in Michigan and be supporting people who are working in the energy sector at high-paying jobs. We also have the highest unemployment rate, or close to it. So it seems like it's a pretty win-win situation to be supporting developing energy sources here within our state, but neither of our political parties can seem to focus on that aspect of creating wealth in this state or in this nation, for that matter. So along the lines of jobs, Julie, why is it so important to have partnerships and collaborations in this realm of job creation?
Well, I can speak to Grand Rapids Community College, and why it's important is we cannot afford as a college to take on all the technologies internally and build the laboratories for technology that changes virtually almost overnight. And so we have to form collaborations with our four-year partners, with our other community colleges, with our manufacturers, with people in the field, because we know that people learn best with hands-on learning. Theory is very important, but when it comes down to the kind of jobs that we're talking about, hands-on theory. Deb can contest that if she disagrees with me on that. So how do we do this? Why would I duplicate a wind technician training program if there's a great program at Kalamazoo Valley? So what is my role in Grand Rapids to do that? So my role and the space we found was something in wind safety with a global certification that ties in very nicely for the people in Kalamazoo who go through that program, or for people moving in to do the operations and maintenance on wind farms. Why would I duplicate what Arn is doing at Grand Valley with what's happening at Merrick? Why can't I find ways to add on, to collaborate with Arn? It's not, there's technology, it's feasible to build on these collaborations together, and it makes us all stronger, better, builds career pathways for people, let you start, let you see where you need to get to, let you make some decisions about your life. Collaboration is really the way that we're going to get energy education done, at least in this city, in this region. Talk about, both Arn and Deb serve on a West Michigan collaborative group, so can you speak to that? What's the value of the collaboration?
Well, I'll certainly underscore what Julie just said. It is about collaboration. I'm a great advocate of collaboration. There's always benefit in gathering people together. I have a great poster at home. I haven't dug it out for a while, but it's a picture of a gentleman in a three-piece suit marching across the London Bridge, and he's carrying a picket sign that says "Collaborate or Die." it's kind of a dramatic sign, but it's true. And I think, just to circle back slightly to what we were just talking about jobs and the economy, since, again, our focus tonight is about the economy, it really is about jobs. And I would challenge everyone in this room to really step forward and be prepared to make some tough choices. As I said at the outset, status quo is not an option when it comes to energy. We'd like to think it's so, but it just isn't. The same way our state legislators are dealing with a very, very difficult challenge, and they are going to have to make some tough choices. I think the public, I think all of us in this room are going to have to make some tough choices. You may not like a wind turbine in your view. You may not like a solar array where you are not used to see one. You may not like the idea of having to pay twice as much for coal because that new plant has to be constructed. But that's where we're headed. I sit on a site, Merrick, where I work, sits on a site, 30 acres, the old Continental Motor site that some of you may know. In its heyday, employed 7,500 people in a 24-hour cycle, 3 shifts, 2,500 people per shift, 7,500 people. Those jobs are gone. They will never, ever come back. Right now, that site employs, by my estimation, about 100 people. So what are we going to do? What's going to happen to that generation, some of whom are in this room, who need jobs? The old manufacturing days are gone. As Julie points out, renewable energy jobs are good jobs. It involves technology. It involves a level of education. But in order to get there, we're going to have to create a marketplace. We're going to have public policy that stimulates development. And so we're going to have to make tough choices. And so for those of us in this room who want to close our eyes and wish it'll just all stay the way it's been, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen.
Horace?
Collaboration is very important, and I think Grand Rapids area, West Michigan area is well known for its collaborative efforts. I look at the Community Sustainability Partnership that started in 2005, and we have Dr. Steckity here with us from Aquinas. We have GRCC, Grand Valley State University, and Grand Rapids Public School and the city signing the Community Sustainability Partnership to work and collaborate in the area of sustainability. And now we have 197 members, 197 partners on that Community Sustainability Partnership, and all of them with the same goal to look at economic, environmental, and social impact that their organizations have on this region, on this community. I think it's critically important. I look at my own role, and we all have to do more with less. And this is not just your standard speech you hear from everyone. We all have to do more with less. My role progressed from starting with community-oriented government into neighborhood enterprise zone, into sustainability, energy efficiency, climate change, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and now Office of Energy and Sustainability, and more. Actually, I'm going to be managing something called Customer First Response Team as well, which I love. And the idea behind collaboration is start with a small idea. My role is really to make things happen. And if I get help from Aquinas College students, Grand Valley State University students, Grand Rapids Community College students, I get interns, I get internship opportunities for them. They get jobs, they can get trained, they learn new things, and I get things done. And if you take that to the next level, to start looking at system approach, what Dr. Steckity mentioned, to look at how we can maybe aggregate demand for large-scale wind energy projects, which is what our West Michigan Energy Group is looking at with Arn and Rick Chapla and WMEAC, West Michigan Strategic Alliance, to see how we can make large-scale projects happen. Because I look at the economics, and for the city, it doesn't make sense to go off the site. It makes sense doing them on-site. On-site energy, on-site renewable energy, large-scale works. Small, it's very difficult. So we look at how we can make these projects work together, and I think working collaboratively, private, public, nonprofit sector, working in sync really could make it happen.
I think we have some examples of collaboration at Grand Rapids Community College that have worked really well in the past and are currently working. We started a collaborative partnership with Habitat for Humanity, building LEED certified homes in 2005. And that then led to remodeled homes that were built to LEED certification standards. And as we speak right now, the nation's first passive house, zero-energy home for Habitat is being constructed in Grand Rapids by one of our classes. And that has been a very, very successful collaborative effort. Habitat provides the house or the building materials. We provide the supervision, the education, and the students, and it's really a win-win program for everybody. And I'm going to toot our horn here a little bit.
I knew you were going, you couldn't resist it. Before the press
I
release comes out.
I just found out just before we started this that we formed another partnership with Bethany Christian Ministries and Habitat and Grand Rapids Community College and applied for a youth build grant that we were just awarded. So that's another collaborative effort that is going to change the face of construction, green building in this area. And this kind of leads to a question Deb had. What educational offerings and approaches will lead us toward a successful regional economic strategy focused on sustainable energy?
Did I submit that one?
You wrote that one. Okay.
Well, I think it speaks to, again, sort of the systems kinds of approach, because I think a lot of the conversation around energy education has focused on the technology piece, and that is a really significant piece of it. It's not the only piece, however, if we take a systems kind of view. And so I guess I'd like to challenge our thinking about that in terms of what other skills do we need. And I'm going to run with this idea of making our region a net energy producer. What kind of education would that need to make that happen? And I would argue that, of course, tooting our horn, that it would require some management expertise, people who are able to think along those kinds of lines in terms of being problem solvers and innovation experts, looking forward and thinking about new models. So, you know, a lot of what we sometimes call collaboration might be cooperation, and there's a difference, right? So collaboration really means that we have a very strong sense of possibility that we're coming to together. And there's nothing easy about collaboration, I will guarantee you. In fact, I like this phrase that it is, I had to write this down because I can never remember the end of jokes either. It's the most unnatural act among unconsenting adults. And what it requires us to do is to educate a citizenry that understands how to use conflict for constructive solutions, for citizens who are able to understand the art of compromise, the citizenry who is able to get down past the surface to understand the truth and then speak that truth to power. How does that happen? It's an education process. It's a way to be able to really open minds to new possibilities and new ways of acting and reacting. I'm going to take the classic example of some of the controversy that just bubbles up among citizens, a lot of them living along lake shores, when we talk about offshore wind. And I think it's a natural reaction to protect our own space, protect our own view shed. But as Horace was mentioning, how can we dig down into that data and be discerning in our decisions? That's an education process. We need to be able to have people who are able to get past just the surface as it appears and understand what's beneath it all and be open to those ideas. So it's a challenge because our educational system is not set up for that kind of thinking. So what new educational models do we need as we move into this 21st century for sustainability? And that's a whole different piece to it. So, you know, it takes a village, and the village needs to have a bright energy future. So lots of different ways to approach that.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears.
Well, you're going to let me say one thing before you
okay,
do that.
go ahead.
So, and we're going to give maybe Rick part of our job in education, too, has been more than educating individuals for jobs, but it's really been and through work, especially with the Right Place and through the Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center, is to help employers understand or manufacturers understand how their specialties that they already have can be used in the energy market. And I don't know if Rick can speak to that a little bit, but I think the education is so broad that we have to do. It's one by one, what happens when you flip on the light switch? You never thought about it before, but this is the result of it. It's another thing to teach you the technical skills or the thinking skills that you're going to need in this new market. But then it's a whole nother thing to teach people who already own their own businesses how something that they do is their core expertise can be something else. And I think that's another area. I don't think I had any idea that we had that many levels of education to do it. I don't remember another sector where we've done, at least since I'm not as old as the rest of them, something where we've done that. Ouch. There. I'm not thinking. Just want to.
Go ahead. Tear her apart.
Well,
He loves me.
Only
He
problem is it's true.
in some ways, I'll look at it in a much sort of maybe a more simplistic approach, but I'm not going to accept the premise that we've got to learn a whole bunch of new skill sets.
That's right. We don't.
I look around our region, and again, from a systems standpoint, and I think Deb and I may start to sound alike here as we go on in the evening, but when I look at our design capabilities of our companies in this community, I look at our manufacturing capability. It's not that we don't know how to make stuff. It's not that we don't know how to build stuff or even design it or sell it or export it. I think we do a lot of that pretty well. It's the products that are being designed and so forth. We've got workers, when you buy new equipment and so forth, you've got some pretty specific sort of training things that have to be done, but I think the core skill sets are available within our region to advance quite a long ways down the road toward being an energy systems exporter. We can make stuff. We can sell it. We spend a lot of time on plans. We do master planning. We do land use planning. We do transportation planning. We haven't yet, as a region, done enough energy planning. I don't think it's a task that, again, for our economic future, that we're going to sit around or should sit around and wait for Washington to decree something, or frankly, even Lansing, to decree some sort of policy direction. I think there's a lot to be said for us on our own and on a regional basis, reflecting upon our collective strengths and our collaborative spirits to chart a different course of independence. We can do this.
Okay, Aaron?
Brian, one thing I might add, in general, I fully support what Rick has just shared in terms of our capacity or ability. But I would like to touch on education a little bit in terms of a new economy and an energy economy. There are some technologies involved, and there are some skill sets involved that I'm not sure we have had to deal with in the past. We have a new battery plant coming to the Muskegon area, a company called 42. We've had some preliminary discussions with that company, and one of the questions is, what about your local workforce? Are they ready to go to work for us? Now, that company has made a decision to proceed, and they are going to be constructing their manufacturing plant starting this year. But the question still remains, will the workforce come from West Michigan, or will they have to import it from elsewhere? And I think as we talk about renewable energy and as we talk about an energy economy, we are going to have to address the fact that we're also going to have to ramp up our educational skill levels amongst our population. Again, this is about tough choices. The same way we got to make some tough choices about state budgets and about what we're willing to pay for energy. What are we willing to pay in terms of the educational expectations of our population? I mentioned earlier that there used to be 7,500 people who worked on the site where I'm employed. Those are basically high-wage, very low-skill jobs. If you had a good set of hands and if you could basically assemble things in an assembly line fashion, you were paid a fairly comfortable wage and you could actually make a career of it. That's all gone. And so I would offer that we better get real serious about STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math related skills. Let me introduce a concept that may really scare people. We might actually have to learn metrics. Okay? Have we thought about metrics? I mean, we want to do business globally. Maybe it's time we set aside inches and feet. Maybe we need to really get serious about learning about millimeters and centimeters, because that's the way we're going to compete globally. That's how we interact globally. Now, a lot of people are going to say, do we really need to go there? Well, I'm telling you, we need to go there. Let me also be so bold as to say, I think we need a longer school day and a longer school year. Now, that's kind of taking a little departure maybe from the principal agenda at hand here, but if we want to develop a workforce, we got to go there. We just have to do it. That's part of the tough choice conversation that we need to have.
Along those lines with the metrics, I'm currently sitting on a national committee that's developing a wind turbine technician program. And I have been the lone voice in that committee to have that manual written in metrics. And they compromised, and it's going to have everything written in metrics with the English conversion in parentheses. So it's a step in the right direction. I tried to get it solely in metrics, but they wouldn't buy into that one. But it is an issue here in Michigan and the United States. If you look at the wind turbine industry in particular, almost all of them come from Europe or from Asia, and they're all spec'd in metrics. Everybody talks metrics. And we have a difficult time making the conversions, and a lot of mistakes have been made making those conversions.
Well, in addition to that, I would say that if we hope to sell our product globally, then we better be prepared to interact using the global standard, which is metrics. And it's just a fact of life, and it is part of workforce development.
Well, some of us, Deb, do remember the Jimmy Carter era, and we were going to convert to metrics at one time in this country.
It's Jimmy Carter twice tonight.
In going along again on education, I've been attempting to start a solar PV class, and that class has been on the books now for almost 9 months. We've tried 3 different times to run the class, and it's finally now has the minimum enrollment to run the very first class. And whenever I talk to people about solar PV, in particular photovoltaics and generating electricity, I always hear, well, it doesn't work here in Michigan. So therefore, why should I get excited or interested about a career in solar PV? Yet if you look at Germany, Germany has less sun irradiance than Michigan does. And yet just last year, they added 6 gigawatts of solar PV in Germany. If you look on a map, we're roughly at the same latitude. And that provided another 1% of their national energy load. So the question is, what is Michigan's consumers' energy, DTE, utilities, what are they doing to promote photovoltaics in this state? If you look at the amount of renewable energy installed, solar is way at the bottom. Anybody who wants to jump in?
I guess I can
All right.
jump in. I'll jump in and guess I'm the utility person here today.
Lucky you.
I think one of the things we insisted when consumers and Detroit Edison prepared to file their renewable energy plans that there be a solar component. Originally, there was no solar component, and both Edison and consumers put one in. They're pretty small. Consumers, I think, is 2 megawatts, and I'm going to guess that Detroit Edison's about 10 megawatts. And the problem is that it's expensive. It runs about $400 a megawatt hour against the current MISO price. It's about $40 a megawatt hour. So you run into that issue. It costs a good 4 times what the wind costs. And so you can't put a lot of it in the system because people don't want to pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity.
But then I would ask, why can Germany do it and we can't?
They pay a lot more for electricity, I believe.
Okay.
Well, and they've got a feed-in tariff. So basically,
You want to
there-
address feed-in tariff and talk about that?
briefly, because I don't, maybe Horace has some
That's
some
one
more
of the
detail,
questions
but
from the audience, so
yeah.
let's address
Basically,
it
a feed-in tariff, okay, a utility has a decision that they can purchase energy from your residential system, right? So you're producing more than you need, and you can, I mean, theoretically, you're selling that energy back, putting it back into the grid. If that happens, then the utility has a decision of how much they're going to pay you for that energy that you've put back into the grid. And Germany has made a public policy decision that they will pay you a very good price. Basically, I think it was 40 or 50 cents a kilowatt hour returning back into the system, right? Tremendous multiples of what you were having to pay. So that makes that return on investment for solar PV become very attractive. So that's really the success of that project, and that's
You got to consider if you were 100% solar on the German system, everybody would pay 40 cents a kilowatt hour plus the adder to get it there on the distribution, about another cent and a half, 2 cents. So do people want to pay? I think it's what we were talking about. Do people want to pay 2 or 3 times what they're paying now for electricity? And do industrial customers, do the existing industrial customers want to pay that much, or are they going to skate off to Indiana where they give away free electricity? Because we face that all the time. Industrial customers come to the commission and say, you either get us 2.5 cent power or we're going to leave the state.
You know,
No,
Paul,
it's complicated.
Paul makes some good points. Let me qualify it a little, though. I'm a Consumers Energy feed-in tariff customer, so they pay me 65 cents a kilowatt hour, which makes my economics better. Now, keeping in mind, though, that I've taken the complete risk of investing in the system. If it doesn't work, they're not going to pay me anything. And lately, when we've been getting all the snow and I won't get up on my roof, I'm not producing any power. But having said that, there's a couple other dimensions to this, because it's not, we've never have a system completely solar and basically having us all pay 40 cents. What we're talking about is solar being a part of a diverse portfolio. And there is economic value for the utilities and the state to have a diverse portfolio. Just don't put all your eggs in one basket. The other thing related to the economics is that there's some real value with both solar and wind, having made the investment up front in knowing pretty much what your costs are going to be for the next 20, 25, 30 years. That has some real value too, because we don't know what the price of coal, price of oil, price of natural gas is going to be over time. So it is true that, you know, solar PV in particular is quite expensive, but it does have some value. The two that I just mentioned, one is more diverse portfolio, one is a hedge against future prices. Germany did it. It was an economic development strategy. And it also was an environmental strategy, because they were basically saying Kyoto is important and we're going to be serious about this. But they also realized that, you know, it's a way to generate jobs, good jobs, you know, and, you know, it's kind of like, what do you pay for?
Okay. Well, that's most of the prepackaged questions that we had, and I have quite a pile here of questions from the audience, and some of these are very intriguing, so I think I'd like to start on some of these questions, and whoever would like to jump in and take off on these. This one is about homes. Most people will not continue to operate a poorly tuned automobile and waste fuel. So what is it going to take for people to tune up their homes and stop wasting energy? Let's go ahead.
Do you want to, can I go first? Okay. Well, I think it's a perfect question because, you know, if you look at three-tier approach, you can start with organizations and look at industry, and then also another important aspect is the homes. We recently partnered with DLAG and Department of Energy, Labor, and Economic Growth, no longer that, I don't know what their new title is, but something along those lines. By the way, not to forget, I think Arm would be proud to know I'm fully metrics ready, so just so you know. But the homes, that's another very important aspect, because I believe even 40 or 50% of the entire energy consumption comes from homes, and there's a huge loss of energy that comes from homes as well. So we're working closely, the City of Grand Rapids, our Office of Energy and Sustainability was able to secure a grant through the state, which is really a federal grant, Department of Energy, and we're working closely with WMEAC to implement that grant. Actually, Community Development Department is implementing currently in working directly with WMEAC to do energy audits in homes in East Hills neighborhood and then some other neighborhoods. But the idea is really that we need to be addressing these issues in homes. We need to do energy audits. We need to look at what the energy consumption is at those homes. And you know, oftentimes we criticize utilities, but there is a good program that the Consumers Energy is currently utilizing in East Hills as well, in conjunction with all these projects, is that smart meter technology is being employed in certain homes to track energy usage. And all these things are very important, because if we are to address long-term issues of energy usage in a system ways, in some holistic approach, we really have to be looking at homes as large energy users. There's a huge energy loss there. There's also, when you send electricity, there's 7% of electricity that's lost from the production to the actual delivery on-site. So doing on-site production or renewable energy production on-site is extremely important as a long-term strategy. And I go back to Rick Chopla's comment about West Michigan and a region that can be looking at energy approach in a more comprehensive way. We could do energy policies for West Michigan. We should be looking at energy policy for the entire nation. Germany made that decision to do energy policy for the entire nation. They made the economic decision. They don't want to be dependent on coal, buying from Russia, natural gas, and being oftentimes cut off from natural gas if they decide they don't like EU policy. So for somebody who came from Europe and really looked at different aspects of renewable energy, energy efficiency as well, I think it's critically important to look at what extreme talents that this region has, the manufacturing base that we have, talented workforce. We have 13 colleges and universities, and extremely valuable leadership. I would say that our regional leadership, both economic, business, and government, is extremely oriented towards more progressive, sustainable way. Just looking at 197 partners that we have on the Community Sustainability Partnership is a testament in itself. So with that in mind, I think we could be doing a lot more, and homes are extremely important. So keep an eye on the Better Buildings for Michigan program. WMEAC is doing a great job, and our the Community Development Department, they're going to be implementing that project in the next 3 years. It's an excellent tool, and we just learned that President Obama announced similar program, I think modeled after ours. But I can only hope that for the commercial buildings as well. So.
President Obama's program is the Better Buildings Initiative, which is for commercial buildings,
correct,
which are another area that we are way behind in improving the energy efficiency of. In fact, even having standards for commercial buildings is pretty low here compared to residential now.
Brian, can I speak to that?
Yeah.
There was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, though, that said it's not quite so easy. We know that there's savings in homes, but we also know that people are fickle, and that theoretically you could reduce the home conservation energy by 30%, but some of the best, most diligent people only get about 9% reduction. Why is that? Where's the gap? And that's where behavioral economics can come in. You know, what is it that it takes to make people make that decision that they're going to do it and do it faithfully? Sort of, the article was talking about, it's just like quitting smoking. We know it's bad for us, but yet, you know, how are we going to make that happen? And one of the things that they've found is that people need direct incentives. So the utility pricing, where, you know, that may mean some kind of incentive that people can get if they reduce X amount. Mm-hmm. And they need things to do it for them. So installing the kinds of things that Better Buildings are doing is great in terms of installing, you know, automatic thermostats and that kind of thing. So, and they need information. There's a great story that I like to tell my students in sustainable energy systems, is that there was a situation in Bangkok where they were having constant brownouts or blackouts because they'd hit that peak load and overshoot, right? And what they did was the federal government started on its channel, its television channel, to run a little meter. And so as the peak load was coming up and up and up and up, the meter would go up and up and up and up, and an amazing thing happened. As it got close to the top, all of a sudden, boom, it dropped back down, because people knew what the consequences were going to be. And
Mm-hmm.
we're disconnected from those consequences, so how can we make that a stronger link?
It's been shown many times we could save a significant amount of energy just by monitoring our energy usage,
Mm-hmm.
being able to see what we do on a regular basis, like on your car dashboard on a mile per gallon basis. And that's what the smart grid and the smart home is
Right.
about, so that people can start monitoring how they use energy and when they use energy and what kinds of consumption from different appliances you might expect. So,
One of the most important things actually the state of Michigan does related to energy use is the state building code. And new energy codes for both residential and commercial buildings go into effect either March 7th or March 9th, I forget which date. This stuff is kind of like pulling teeth. It does make a difference, because what has been said is very important, but you do need a minimum standard, and the more stringent minimum standard, the better. So we are making progress in that area, but it's funny, you hear people say, oh yeah, I built to the code. I say, well, great, that's the minimum standard. What, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, big deal. But we have raised the bar, and I think that's real important.
yeah, that used to be a real criticism when we had almost the lowest building code in the nation.
Oh.
But it's come up considerably since.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, that's a good point to make. We were literally kind of the laughing stock of the country for a while because our code was so bad.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Rick, you
John,
want-
could you tell us a little bit about what that means? It sounds to me like we build a whole generation or several generations of residential dwellings that are substandard from an energy standpoint.
That's correct.
Doesn't that leave us in a good position to move forward?
Well, it does mean there's a lot of work to do with respect to retrofitting, but as you know, you lose a lot of opportunities when you don't build it at least reasonably right at the start, you know, because just some things are easier to do at new construction. And you are making investments, you know, people aren't going to change their windows every couple years. You're going to have, the windows are expensive, so you put in good windows at the start, whether it's commercial or residential building, it makes a big difference. But unfortunately, we do have a lot of retrofit opportunities.
But if I could add to that, we have retrofit opportunities, but we have challenges even with, again, public policy. I'd like to come back to public policy. I happened to drive by a new home construction site recently, probably one of 12 new homes being built in the state right now. But here's the observation. It was a brand new construction. They were just working on the foundations, and what I observed was this. The excavated site, cinder block walls were up, the black asphalt moisture barrier had been applied, and they were backfilling. Now, in this day and age, given what John has just said, should we be building homes with cinder block basement walls without any insulation, with just an asphalt moisture barrier? I would say we are totally missing the point, and we are not bold enough to put public policies in place at the township, at the city, at the state level, and we're kidding ourselves if we think we're really addressing seriously some of the energy conservation opportunities.
That's definitely true. The average home with an uninsulated foundation wall is losing 20 to 30% of all the heat you're putting into that house through that uninsulated foundation. It's significant. And Rick, you finally get to say something.
That's part of the education process. I mean, I'm sorry, but most of us are ignorant as can be about where our energy comes from, how we use our energy, and what our energy costs. And we've all, I think, need to self-examine. I think that's been talked about as well. That'll help in making future energy decisions, and especially about the type of systems that we'll deploy. I'm an eternal optimist, and maybe I have to be in my work that I do with the right place. But when I look around at the innovation, I look at the creativity, especially, and the absolute, almost a religious fervor pursuit of cost reduction that companies and manufacturers go through every day. They're not waiting for a code. They're not going to wait for a policy that's going to spring them into action on capital outlay cost. I mean, every day that the price of energy keeps going up, or the price of energy goes up on a yearly basis, at the same time with companies looking at their bottom line costs and an increasing share of that cost being devoted to energy, there's a pretty strong market and a compelling market reason for them to look at doing business differently and building buildings differently. I'll listen to the marketplace to some degree, and I'll listen to some of my building contractor buddies. And on a residential side, I'm sorry, I think we're pretty slow and we're pretty lazy. But I'm not going to buy that certainly on a manufacturing basis, on plants that are being built. We're not going to be too far off, I think, even in this region. We pride ourselves now on having untold numbers of LEED certified buildings and residential structures. We've attacked it. I don't think we're too far off, and we're going to see it probably within this decade. You're going to see places of manufacturing that, in fact, are using less energy, and they're going to be producing more energy. It's just the technological changes as well are enabling them and their creativity to meet a higher conservation of financial resources that they're ultimately moving toward a place that they're going to be producing more energy than they're using. And I think that's part of the strategy as well. I think on our regional basis, it's not so much of having to think that we've got to feed energy into the grid, as much as maybe I'm going to feed energy to my neighbor, or maybe I am going to do and put together true geographic-based collaboratives between different land uses, et cetera, that we'll make our own energy and frankly we'll consume it as well. Maybe community systems is another form of energy diversification that has opportunities out there. Certainly does, because I think we want to make sure that we get our share as well of not importing renewable energy systems, but again, designing, building, and employing them West Michigan-based companies and systems.
Anybody want to go after that?
Well, I guess I'd say one thing. I think one of the things you see as you try and implement energy efficiency measures, one of the keystones is always financing. Where does the money come from? And in the industrial and commercial sector, we're seeing payback requirements of less than a year. They won't make an investment unless I can get it back in less than a year.
Correct.
Then in the residential side, people just don't have the money. I know we've been fortunate, the commission was, to issue a grant and jumpstart something called Michigan Saves, which is going to be, on the residential side, provide financing for some of the programs that the utilities go out and recommend. So we have a lot of hope for that.
Can you expand on Michigan Saves a little bit? Who qualifies for Michigan Saves?
Well, Michigan Saves, and I'm not totally the expert here, is a interest buy-down activity where we put in a base amount of money to guarantee loans, and it's primarily being implemented by credit unions currently, because they were really interested. They were like the first buy-ons for it. So if it's an approved energy efficiency measure, especially one that comes out of a utility-sponsored program, the installer applies for the loan at the credit union, and then Michigan Saves guarantees that loan, so you get a lower interest rate.
It's a 7% rate, and to qualify, you have to have a credit score of 640 or above.
A credit score of 640 or above, and a 7% rate? Everybody heard that? Come on up here, Rachel.
Michigan Saves is a statewide program that'll provide you a loan to invest up to $12,000 in your home at 7%. You need to have a credit score of 640 or above in order to qualify. So that's a pretty reasonable qualification for most folks, and also a relatively good rate for what is an unsecured, what would be to the homeowner an unsecured loan. Competitive rates would be at 13 or 14% on the market right now. Just michigansaves.org, you can find out more about that.
Okay. Well, we got about a half hour left here. I'd like to hit some of the questions that have been submitted by the audience here. One is, what do you feel will make the greatest impact or has the greatest opportunity as a renewable energy resource in Grand Rapids? You want to pick one of them? Take a shot at that?
Well, I just jump in and say probably energy efficiency would be your best, your quickest, and your best payback. I know it's not a renewable, but but it's probably in an urban setting, it's probably your best bet.
Yeah, the question is specifically renewable resource. Energy efficiency, I'm sure, is applicable everywhere, but renewables aren't everywhere.
Well, energy efficiency could be first. I'll take a shot at it. And it's a first step to energy efficiency is enabling any organization to meet, if they have renewable energy goals or portfolio, to meet them. But you mentioned diverse portfolio is very important. I think it's not just a single renewable energy. It's going to be a mix of those. It's going to be solar and wind and even geothermal. I know some people view geothermal more as an energy efficiency. I view it both ways, that renewable energy and energy efficiency. So that's the kind of approach, and maybe some new technologies. You know, we're currently in the data test for some fluid pressure to renewable energy kind of project. We're looking at those as well. Any mix, and again, economics are the most important piece. So when you look at renewable energy, you have to look at what's the payback. And you mentioned, 2-3 years for a lot of industrial, commercial businesses. That's 2-3 years. When you look at wind and the small scale wind, medium size, that becomes a little bit more challenging. So large scale is not possible in the urban setting. Obviously, you really can't put 2.5 megawatt turbine maybe downtown. But you look at, there are a lot of opportunities outside in the suburban area. There are a lot of farmlands. There's the study that shows wind areas. I think there's a lot more potential beyond those wind areas that were pointed out in the state study. And the wind is probably the shortest payback. But I really believe that solar and geothermal play an important role in the whole portfolio.
Well, I have to give a personal opinion. I think a biodigester downtown would be could be a job creator, a huge energy generator for us by taking the human, food, and animal waste in the area. I think that's a huge, if you asked for one project, that was the question, right? So that would be my 2 cents and my vote, and I think would make sense for the city and its neighbors to pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want Grand Rapids and frankly the West Michigan region to be that exporter of renewable energy as opposed to being an importer of more coal and natural gas and oil. I think that's going to be part of our economic future. It has a direct relationship. We're spending billions of dollars even in this region for energy. If we can divert some of that to our own companies and deploy a variety of renewable energy systems, and I agree with Horace. I mean, I think there's technologies out there we're not even thinking of. I mean, we've already had some very interesting approaches of people that look at it much more from a physics standpoint and just understanding movement. That's energy, and how do you capture that? We're just scratching the surface, and I think the beauty of it is of why we're so well positioned. I mean, think about it. Come on, 5 years ago, I mean, was anybody talking about advanced energy storage systems? And now we're going to be literally part of world leadership in the design and the manufacture. The same will come true with, think about the advances even in the last 5 years of our companies in West Michigan, even around solar. And bioenergy is a whole nother easy system. We've got lots of feedstock, stuff that we're currently dumping into a sewer or we're putting it into a landfill that constitutes, frankly, a good feedstock for energy production. I want to make sure from the right place standpoint anyway. I mean, part of that's my job, is to find the companies that have the design capabilities, the manufacturing capabilities, the installation. Community college, a part of the collaboration, is going to train the workforce. I don't doubt that. And Deb Steckety and the Aquinas, sustainability program is going to also produce those workers that are going to be there. But part of our mantra for economic future is going to be, and leadership is going to be not dependent upon others, but upon what we're going to do for ourselves.
If I could just add to that again, I'd like to come back to public policy, because it is ultimately about the choices and decisions we make. What if Grand Rapids announced a zero waste policy for 2015, 2020, 2025? Give ourselves a little more time. We have great examples in our manufacturing sector here in West Michigan. We have companies that have fully embraced and are managing on a day-to-day basis a zero waste policy. That is to say, there is no waste that leaves the job site or the manufacturing site. Everything has value, everything is recycled, everything is sold, everything is recirculated. We can do that in our communities. We can produce biofuel, we can produce energy with waste, but we have to make some choices to do that. There will be perhaps some upfront capital costs, but I would argue that there is a very serious and very significant payback that could be achieved probably in less than 10 years in many cases. But we've got to make the choices, and all of you in this room have to lean on your public policy makers, whether it's your city commissioners or your state representatives, to say, let's go there, let's do it, let's make the tough choice.
I went to a conference a couple weeks back in Lansing on bioenergy, on biomass conversions. And it was called Waste to Energy, was the name of the conference. And one of the outcomes of that conference was that all the participants wanted the word waste removed from it. And they wanted it changed to biomass to energy, because there is no real such thing as waste. It's an input to another system that generates something useful, energy in this case. And that we tend here to think of waste. We produce waste. But in other countries, they don't use that concept. They don't think that way. It's just an output that's an input to another system that's generating energy or generating a product or being used in some way. So I think, again, education is part of the key there, is to change the thinking on how we view what we get rid of.
I have to speak up on this too, and I guess I'll call myself, there's sort of this phrase, I'm eco-pragmatist. And it's one that has to be realistic about how quickly we can make these transitions and the limitations of the technologies that we currently have in place. So I love the aspiration, and I give every day of my working life to that aspiration, but I also recognize that we have to understand how the system works. So if I would say, you know, what is our base load required for the city of Grand Rapids, to your point, and say, is there any renewable resource that can meet that base load, right? That minimum load of energy that we all need to have our homes operating. And if I go that way, then I'm limited in that technology. And even if I deploy every renewable technology that we have, if I exclude nuclear, I can't do it, given today's restrictions on that technology. How much space I need for the photovoltaics, if I'm making that boundary the city of Grand Rapids, right? I can't do it.
That's based on current load?
Current base load.
Okay.
I would argue.
Well, I think everybody would argue that
Yeah.
the first thing you would do is cut that base load at least in half.
Right, okay.
And then,
Yeah.
okay.
But to your question, you know, I think geothermal becomes the most possible in that particular instance. Would you think?
I agree. Geothermal has a huge potential. There's always the question of cost, and that's where we go back to the issue of, you know, biodigester. We looked at that. I would love to do biodigesters. I think that makes sense. But you look at what kind of waste goes in, what comes out, how much is the actual cost of investment, what's the payback, what's the political will to do it? You know, do we have funding to do it? Can we, giving the current, you know, I'm looking at revenue sharing being cut, property taxes potentially lost, income tax, all that. You can go and make the argument pro and against it. But if you make the economic argument for any project and you can show that it works within the system, I agree. I think geothermal is probably a huge potential that's totally untapped here in this region.
I guess even if we take all the economics out, the public policy, technologically,
It's not possible.
it's not possible.
You still need the base load. You need
Yeah.
coal. You may need coal and nuclear. You still need some portion of it, especially for industrial users.
Yeah.
We have a lot of capacity that have large Lake Michigan filtration plant, sewer plant. You still need some base load.
That's the truth, I guess, that we need to think about. So
I don't
Well-
agree.
Yeah.
you don't.
I don't agree.
Good. I'm so glad.
I think within the confines of Grand Rapids, you could do it. And
So do I.
don't say photovoltaic, because you got all kinds of concentrated,
Exactly.
solar. You got methods to store it, and it can be figured out.
Well, you know,
I like his optimism.
I like that.
yeah,
Thank you, Bob.
I like that too. Related to that issue, I recently did a blog. It was 100% renewables ? And it basically was based on a couple studies I had read. Worldwide, we could get to 95% renewables by 2050, though. And that's the key of this stuff, you know, what type of time dimension do you need? Some of this will take a while, and all those studies were based, in my assumptions too, on a significant amount of energy efficiency, a really smart grid to make all the pieces work together. But having said there, I think it's useful to think in terms that this is possible and not be constrained by what we can do tomorrow. You know, we need to think in terms that this is our ultimate goal, and how are we going to get there? Certainly it's not practical tomorrow or next year, but we need to start putting the pieces in place to get us there. And you know, hopefully before 2050.
Horace?
Well, I think that's exactly the point. Beyond when you start thinking and putting pieces together, it can happen. You know, the city has a 100% renewable energy goal. Mayor really set high standard, and when you think about it, it really not only forced, but it created very innovative thinking among city staff and engaging partners, MARIC, colleges, universities, to try and find a solution to get there. And again, I'm repeating that. I don't have funding assigned for that project, but I have to find a way to get it. And it's not easy, but it's great. It's a great journey. It really is. If you can work out the details and work the projects with local companies, local universities, and find a way to finance it and make it happen economically, to make them economically feasible, and then you calculate environmental and social impact, why not dream 100%?
And just so that we leave on a friendly basis. I know, Bob. So it's great. You know, like I said, I'm into the aspiration. I just think we have to be realistic about what it's going to take to get us there. That's my point.
Pardon?
Puzzles.
What's that?
Pieces of the puzzle.
Correct.
Yeah.
Pieces. The
Exactly.
problem is nobody knows what the picture looks like.
Right.
And I would also reinsert here the word collaboration, because maybe the solution to Grand Rapids achieving 100% renewable isn't easily achieved within the confines of Grand Rapids, but I would offer that if we were to take a West Michigan regional approach, we might very well be able to achieve that goal quite readily. And there may be willing partners within 50 miles of where we're sitting who would be very willing to help Grand Rapids achieve its goal, as well as other cities in the region.
Well, since you opened this can of worms about
See,
coal and nuclear being part of the mix here, one of the questions is, and this is to Mr. Proudfoot, can you please communicate to your audience the viability of clean coal in Michigan? As a renewable energy resource, are the offsets provided by carbon sinks okay and economically and sustainably responsible?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I understand the question, but
I think they're asking, is clean coal really a viable alternative?
well, clean coal technically is a DOE definition, and clean coal included the emission of carbon into the atmosphere. So I assume this person is probably talking about a sequestration activity where no carbon was released into the atmosphere. And it's probably doable. The underground structures to hold the CO2 are probably there. They'll probably keep it there. But again, we run into the cost issue, because a plant, you know, it's hard to imagine how much CO2 a power plant emits. The Cobb units, for example, will burn, in 3 days, they'll burn a complete trainload of coal. You know, 120 carloads of coal. You see it standing there. When it does that, it creates more CO2 by weight than that trainload of coal, because it takes the carbon, combines oxygen to it, and releases it into the atmosphere. So as you handle emissions from power plants, you run into two areas that are really tough. One is the little stuff like toxic metals, where there's just almost too much of it to find in the flue gas. And the other thing you run into is CO2. It's just the amount that it emits is just immense from a tonnage standpoint.
I've read
So you have to take that gas and you have to condense it into a liquid so you can inject it. And that takes about 20 to 30% by today's standards, unless they can come up with some kind of catalyst that does it without compression. First of all, you have to collect it with a catalyst, get it out of the catalyst, and compress it and put it to the ground. So you're looking at losing 30% of your energy, which means you have to burn even more coal to get there, and you have to buy all the equipment. So a full carbon sequestration coal plant, I'll take a shot in the dark, it's going to be at least double the cost of the $133 per megawatt hour. Did that answer the question, or maybe I strayed
and I
off?
was going to make the point about the excess energy it takes to compress it, so I'm glad you did that. Okay, let's, Julie, I want you to kind of take this question. It says, what steps are we taking in Michigan to teach our youth about energy and the outcomes of the use of energy in order for them to know about renewable energy and the effect it has on them and their environment?
You know, that's our secret plan we don't want to tell too many people about, that we're starting at third grade level. First of all, a plan to work with teachers to re-educate teachers about energy and sustainability and what that means. And then a little project to have students bring in their family's consumer's energy or DTE bill and help the student understand what that means so they can teach their families what that means. So it is the great vast conspiracy that we're starting at third grade level. And that may be where we get the most bang for our educational buck as far as that goes. Another thing is the younger minds really understand, especially in the smart grid technology and smart meters, and I'm a person who believes in energy conservation, but when I went to the Consumer's Energy smart home and I saw the effects of a dryer and I saw the effects of a dishwasher, hey guys, I had no idea it was that bad. So call me naive, just an average American. So where can we replicate that? In areas, can we bring it to the mall? Can it be in the mall parking lot for people to see the effects of that? I just think we have to think unconventionally about how we're going to teach people what it means, what the effects are of what they do. So yes, we're starting at a young age. We have a great collaboration here in Kent County with the Intermediate School District. We're doing it with people who have a love of wanting to learn this because frankly we have no money to direct in this way at this time. We haven't found resources, but we have dedicated groups of teachers, especially science teachers and English teachers, who have come forward and are trying to learn. I know we're working with our collaborative colleges to help retrain some of our faculty members in these energy skills. So I think it really is a bottom up, and at least in this region, I think we have a plan to address that at a young age. And I think that we'll see the payoff of that. I wish we had started that 20 years ago.
I'd like to add to that. I think that it's not only teaching people about energy, but I think it's teaching people to understand and appreciate nature and the cycles of nature.
There you go.
There's a program called No Child Left Inside, and that yeah, you heard that one? Yeah. No, it's an actual program.
It's a real program
that is going around the country implementing environmental awareness programs for young kids, because if you look at the data, most kids now spend 90% of their time inside, and most of that time is in front of some kind of a monitor. And when I was a kid, and most people I know in my generation, you didn't stay in the house. You got thrown out of the house. You couldn't be in that environment. And I think it's that lack of connection to nature that starts this whole lack of connection to where our energy comes from and how the whole cycle operates in the first place. Well, 2 cents worth here.
I would like to add a note of hope here. We just turned over 2/3 of our Michigan state legislature, approximately. And I was at a meeting recently where a lot of the new state legislators were present, and it was remarkable how many younger faces I saw in the crowd. And that gives me a real sense of hope, because as has been pointed out, our younger people, our younger generation, do get it. I think we have just moved some people in the state legislature who, once they sort out all their fiscal troubles, which are immense, but they will get through them, I think we'll be prepared to tackle some energy-related issues, because they do get it. They do understand the issues. They have an appreciation for the environmental issues that we're aware of. And so when that next round of wind energy legislation gets introduced, or when somebody wants to talk about perhaps taking the Michigan RPS to 15%, we may find that we have some decision makers in Lansing who, number one, understand the issue, and number two, might be willing to make some tough choices.
Okay, I think we got time for about one more question. And I apologize to everybody whose questions I didn't make it to. There's a whole pile of them here. And I understand these are going to be posted on WMEAC's site or through their blog. So this one I've had the same question many times. I'd love to hear the answer to. What will happen to new and existing renewable energy installations once DTE and consumers meet their 10% goals?
Well, I guess maybe I shouldn't try and answer this, but the 10% goal is not for just 2015. They have to maintain that goal And the current statute I think the statute requires it for 5 more years. But you got to understand that what an RPS standard is, it's like pulling on the end of the rope to get the new technology in place. So once we get to that point, this magic renewable generation that we pulled ahead, what does it become? It becomes regular, boring utility generation. And it'll move into rate base, and we won't charge the RPS surcharge, and we won't maintain the cap. It just becomes a generation of utility power plants. They'll just be renewable.
Well, the question I have is then would you advocate for a higher percentage when you get to that point? Would you set a new goal to
Well,
try?
Since that's my responsibility, I probably would advocate for it. But I think what we've discovered, and the commission just reported it on it, is that the 10% is pretty darn easy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Consumers Energy is going to come in and slash their surcharge to 1/3 of what it was, and we're going to hit the 10%. Maybe it should have been 15%.
So there would be no argument to raise it.
Well, you can get it from me. But I think the thing to do is, you know, if you look at 20% by 2020,
Mm-hmm.
you know, every time somebody has some kind of magic number like that they want to put out there, you got to look at what point it crosses to, or what point it crosses. Well, 10%, if you're going to make 2,000 by 25 or 20% by 2025, you're going to have to cross through the 10%. So we just wait a few years and we reevaluate the standard. That's what a reasonable person will do, right? I mean,
We're talking legislature here. Anybody else want to take that one? We got this.
The only thing I would add to it is, as I think suggested at the outset, Michigan still, even with a 10% RPS, has only barely, stepped forward. We have states in the Midwest with RPS standards of 25%, 15%, 20%. Some of them even have set aside specifically for solar and wind. Paul is more familiar with this than I would be, could speak to that. But 10% is really a very nominal contribution we're making to our energy future. And so if we really want to be bold and if we want to be really, if we really want to challenge ourselves, we have to go way beyond where we are at 10%.
Thank you.
I echo that sentiment. I think we should go and aim for much higher RPS. We advocated strongly for much higher RPS.
And my last shot at this will be is that we're going to be recognized as a world leader in renewable energy and sustainability is the point in time when a renewable portfolio standard, frankly, is irrelevant. It's when our companies and our people and our residential structures and all of our buildings, regardless of what a policy statement is, it's when those buildings and those companies and people are making decisions that they're saying, I want 30% of the energy that I use, and set it as a goal that it comes from renewables. I think that's going to happen faster than any public policy. I think companies are moving very rapidly in that form and fashion. They're going to deploy an array. They're going to of renewable energy standards just because of the cost. We're going to talk a lot about forcing our utility companies and mandating particular public policy standards for companies and utility companies on the generation of renewable energy. And I think we're still missing another real basic point, and that's, again, that our companies themselves will set their own goals, and the costs are going to force it, and they're going to look to source it in West Michigan, and we're going to design them, and we're going to build them, and we're going to install them. We're going to capture back some of those billions of dollars that we're exporting out of the state, and we're going to put people back to work in our region in companies that we own, that are not part of multinational companies, that are companies that are owned by people right here in West Michigan.
You got
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. What a great way to end this. So I think we should give a round of applause to this panel, everybody. And that concludes our, you got something to say, Rachel? Sorry.
A couple of business items to take care of. Thank you again to Brian. Great job moderating this lively discussion and all of our panelists.